All right, it's finally time for the new Wayside School. Wayside School, Beneath the Cloud of Doom. I'm so excited. I'm going to read a note from the author, Louis Satcher. This is the fourth book about Wayside School. I wrote the first one, Sideways Stories from Wayside School, more than 40 years ago. I am a lot older now, but in my heart, I'm still Louis the yard teacher, passing out the balls and playing with the kids at recess. To fully enjoy this book, you should read the other three first, wait 40 years, and then read this one. Or you can just read it now. All right, chapter 1. The Bells of Wayside. It is very important that the children at Wayside School know the bell system. The first bell in the morning sounds like this. Whoop, 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 whoop. When they hear it, they know they have 16 minutes to get to class. That's not too difficult for those in Mr. Hardgrove's class on the 3rd floor. But Wayside School is a 30-story building with one room on each floor. So for those who happen to be in Mrs. Jewell's class, way up on the 30th floor, they must be ready on the first whoop. Todd was in Mrs. Jewell's class. He was stuck behind a mass of kids outside the building, waiting for the doors to open. He jumped up and down, trying to see over the heads of those in front of him. If he was late, Mrs. Jewell would put his name on the blackboard under the word discipline. The kids who went to class on the lower floors often dilly-dallied. If Todd got stuck behind a large group of dilly-dalliers, he'd have no chance. Inside the principal's office, Mr. Kidswatter sat behind his enormous desk as he watched the clock. At the moment the second hand reached the number 12, he shrieked into his microphone, "Whoop, whoop, 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 whoop." The doors unlocked and the children stampeded into the building and up the stairs. Todd tried his best to weave his way to the front, but there wasn't a lot of room. 8 minutes later, Mr. Kidswatter tugged on the rope hanging through the hole in the ceiling, and a second bell rang. Clang, 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 clang. Todd counted 8 clangs. That meant he now had 8 minutes to get to class. 7 or 9 clangs would have meant something completely different. 7 meant a helicopter was landing on the roof. 9 clangs meant a porcupine had entered the building. So far, he had only made it to the 7th floor, but he had finally managed to weave his way past all the dilly-dalliers. There was nothing to slow him down now. When he reached the 18th floor, he heard this sound. Ching-a-ling, ching-a-ling, ching-a-ling. Nothing to worry about there. That just meant they were out of donuts in the teacher's lounge. The scary bell was the late bell. It didn't matter where he was. It always sounded like an angry driver was slamming on a car horn right behind him. It made Todd very jumpy every time. He quickly dashed from the 18th to the 20th floor. That's because there's no 19th floor. His legs were sore and he was breathing hard. As he reached the top, just ahead he could see Joy entering the classroom. "Don't shut the..." Todd shouted. Joy shut the door behind her. "Guzak," said Todd. He was just opening it when the horn blared as if it were right behind him. "You're late, Todd," said Mrs. Jewell as he entered the classroom. "Write your..." "I know," he said, and he wrote his name on the whiteboard under the word discipline. Other bells rang throughout the day. At noon, the lunch bell kaboinked 3 times. 3 kaboinks meant macaroons and cheese. The bell for recess was a single ding, but nobody ever missed that bell. At the end of each day, Mr. Kidswatter would bang a giant gong with an iron mallet. It was his favorite thing about being principal. Todd sat at his desk, glumly looking at the whiteboard. The day had started off badly for him and had only gotten worse. There was now a check mark next to his name under the word discipline. Next to that, Mrs. Jewell kept adding new homework assignments. Read a book, write a book report, draw a picture. Don't forget your paperclip. History pages 55 through 59 and answer questions on 61 and 62. Math worksheet, do even and odd numbered problems. Science, read pages 29 through 34 and do experiment on 37. Todd had a sick feeling in his stomach, and it wasn't just the mac and cheese. In big letters across the top of the whiteboard, Mrs. Jules had written, "Ultimate test starts tomorrow." Mrs. Jules had been warning the class about the ultimate test all year. The test would last for 3 days. If he failed, Todd would be sent back to kindergarten. And then he heard it, the most magical bell of all. Ping pong! This bell had only rung once in the history of Wayside School, and nobody knew who rang it, but everyone knew what it meant. All around, kids began cheering and clapping their hands. Shouts of joy could be heard coming from every floor of Wayside School. Todd just sat there, stunned in disbelief. It rang again. Ping pong! It was the erase the blackboard bell. Mrs. Jules had no choice. She picked up the eraser. Up and down Wayside School, teachers were doing the same thing. Todd smiled as the homework assignments were wiped away. The ultimate test was canceled. His name was removed from the discipline list, and even the word discipline soon disappeared. Deep in the basement, a man with a black mustache snapped open a briefcase. Another man, also with a black mustache, placed a small silver ball into the case. A third man, who was bald, put in a solid gold ping pong paddle. Chapter 2. A Million. By the time Terrence got to school, he had already kicked 99 different things. It started the moment he woke up. He kicked his bed. He kicked Rocky, his favorite stuffed animal. When he left his bedroom, he kicked the door shut. He kicked the wall as he sat at the kitchen counter and ate cereal. He kicked a table. He kicked 3 chairs. He kicked rocks on the way to school. He kicked the flagpole. Still, as much as Terrence liked to kick things, it would take him his whole life to kick 1,000,000 things. "How much is 1,000,000?" Mrs. Jules asked her class. Oh, I know, said Mac, stretching his hand high. Mrs. Jules called on Mac. 1,000,000, Mac answered proudly. "Well, yes, I suppose that's correct," said Mrs. Jules. 1,000,000 is 1,000,000. Anyone else? John? John lowered his hand. 999,999. He paused, then added, +1. He smiled. "Ooh, that's good, John," said Dana, very impressed. "John's really smart," Joe agreed. Terrence wasn't paying attention. His big toe hurt from all that kicking. His toenail was too long. Sherry, who had been sleeping at her desk, suddenly awoke, then said, 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 times 10. And then she rested her head on her red and blue overcoat and went back to sleep. "Is that right, Mrs. Jules?" asked Jason. Said Mrs. Jules as she tried to multiply all of Sherry's 10s. "Well, if Sherry said it, it must be right." "Math makes my brain numb," said Damien. "That's why they're called numbers," said DJ. Terrence's big toe throbbed in pain. He couldn't think about anything else. "There's really only one way to understand just how big 1,000,000 is," said Mrs. Jules, "and it's not by using math. We need to collect 1,000,000 somethings." "Dollars!" exclaimed Joy. Everyone cheered. They liked that idea. "Then we would have the biggest party ever," said Dee Dee. "We're not collecting $1,000,000, said Mrs. Jules. "Any other ideas?" "Pumpkins," suggested Dana. Everyone cheered at Dana's idea too, but not as loudly as Joy's. "I don't think 1,000,000 pumpkins would fit in the school," said Mrs. Jules. "We need something small and not too expensive." Stephen suggested little pieces of paper. Nobody cheered. Boring, said Kathy. Stephen felt hurt, but deep down he had to admit that collecting bits of paper wouldn't have been a whole lot of fun. Ron suggested mud, but that was also rejected. It's a good idea, Ron, said Mrs. Jules, but you can't count mud. Why not? He asked. There's no such thing as one mud or two muds, exclaimed Mrs. Jules. Why not? Ron asked again. I don't know, Mrs. Jules had to admit. Terrence couldn't take it any longer. He took off his shoe, then his sock. One desk over, Rondi stared at him, horrified. Terrence's toenail was bent out of shape, and it had turned black and blue. He opened his desk and took out a pair of safety scissors. Then, crossing one leg over the other, he started snipping. You can't cut your toenails in class, said Rondi. It's against the rules. Who says Terrence. It was one tough toenail, and the scissors weren't all that sharp. Mrs. Jules, called Rondi, Terrence is cutting his toenail, right in class. Some kids laughed. Some said, gross. Terrence pushed hard on the scissors. At last, a piece of his toenail fell free. His toe instantly felt better. Terrence, come up here now, demanded Mrs. Jules, and bring your toenail with you. Terrence picked up the clipping off the floor. One shoe off, one shoe on, he hobbled over to the front of the room. Give me that, Mrs. Jules demanded. Terrence dropped the clipping into his teacher's outstretched hand. You're a genius, Terrence, said Mrs. Jules. She held his nail clipping high in the air. That's one, she announced. 999,999 to go. Chapter 3. Up and down. Up, said DJ. Down, replied Kathy, who sat next to him. Up, DJ repeated. Down, Kathy insisted. In truth, Kathy didn't know what DJ was talking about. She just liked to argue. No matter what DJ said, she always said the opposite. Up, DJ said again. Down, Kathy instantly replied. Shh, said Dana, who sat behind Kathy. I'm trying to read. Kathy turned around. Dana's face was streaked with tears. Why are you crying? Asked Kathy. Dana showed her the book that she'd been reading, The Lost Giraffe. So? Asked Kathy. The giraffe is lost, Dana sobbed. Well, what did you expect, stupid? Asked Kathy. She didn't like Dana any more than she liked DJ. Up, said DJ. Down, snapped Kathy. Dana, Kathy, DJ, said Mrs. Jules, you are making a lot of noise for silent reading. Sorry, said DJ. I can't help it. I have the hiccups. Kathy turned red. She had been arguing with a hiccup. Has this ever happened before? Mrs. Jules asked him. I've had the hiccups before, said DJ. But they always went away. Stand on your head and drink a glass of water, Myron suggested. Eat a lemon, said Jenny. Hold your tongue while you say the Pledge of Allegiance, said Joy. DJ tried their suggestions. When he finished, his mouth was puckered, his shirt was wet, and he still had the hiccups. He felt very patriotic, however. I think you better go see Dr. Pickle, said Mrs. Jules. Kathy will take you. Kathy hopped out of her seat, glad she wouldn't have to read. Come on, dummy, she said, and led DJ out the door. Up, hiccuped DJ. Down, said Kathy. She couldn't help herself either. Dr. Pickle's real name was Dr. Pickell. His office was on the 4th floor. Kathy knocked on the door. Dr. Pickle opened it. He had a pointy beard and wore glasses. Yes, he said. Stupid here's got the hiccup, said Kathy. Up, hiccuped DJ. Down, said Kathy. Dr. Pickle rubbed his chin. Very interesting, he muttered, although he was looking at Kathy, not at DJ. Very, very interesting. He told Kathy to wait and invited DJ inside. Yeah, Annie smiles too much, Kathy called just before the door shut. DJ sat down on a couch. Dr. Pickle sat across from him. He held a long gold chain. On one end hung a green stone shaped like a pickle. Dr. Pickle gently swung the stone back and forth, back and forth. Watch the pickle, he said. His voice was warm and soothing. DJ's eyes moved back and forth with the stone. I will count to 5, and you will fall into a deep, deep sleep. Dr. Pickle slowly counted. 1, 2... Boo! DJ fell off the couch. Well? Asked Dr. Pickle. DJ got up. He waited a moment. I think they're gone, he said. Dr. Pickle led him to the door. First thing we learned in psychiatrist school, he said, patting DJ on the head. My hiccups are all gone, DJ told Kathy. Who cares, said Kathy. Wait, said Dr. Pickle. Would you mind stepping inside my office, young lady? Me? Asked Kathy. Please, said Dr. Pickle. But he's the sicko, said Kathy, pointing at DJ. Please, Dr. Pickle repeated. Kathy shrugged, then entered the counselor's office. That beard is really ugly, she said. I guess your face must be even worse, huh? DJ sat on the floor in the hallway with his back against the wall, waiting for Kathy. He smiled, happy that his hiccups were gone, although he missed them a little bit too. Hiccups are annoying, but kind of fun. Some time later, the counselor's door opened. Thank you, Dr. Pickle, said Kathy, calling him by his proper name. You are very wise, and I like your beard. That's very nice of you to say, Kathy, said the counselor. She stepped out the door. Hi, DJ, she greeted him. Thanks for waiting. You're a good friend. The smile left DJ's face. Something was definitely wrong with Kathy. Let's go up, said DJ. Yes, up, Kathy agreed. Now he was really worried. Chapter 4. Consider the paperclip. Read a book, write a book report, draw a picture. That was the assignment Mrs. Jules put up on the board. Dana's picture showed a giraffe studying a map. She had drawn a large question mark over the giraffe's head. Her book report had only to be 1 page, but she had written 2 whole pages. The Lost Giraffe was her favorite book ever. Now all she needed was a paperclip. She searched her desk. She found quite a few pencils, mostly broken. There were lots of eraser bits and crayon nubs. There was also a crumb-covered pink piece of paper that had come off the bottom of a cupcake. Oh no, no, oh no, she moaned as she continued to search. She raised her hand. Yes, Dana, said Mrs. Jules. I need a new paperclip. But I gave you one at the beginning of the year, said Mrs. Jules. I know, Mrs. Jules, I'm sorry. I just can't find it. Mrs. Jules sighed. I'm very disappointed in you, Dana. Oh, I need a paperclip too, said Joe. Mrs. Jules glared at him. What did you do with the one I gave you? She demanded. I think I used it on my science homework, said Joe. I handed that back yesterday, Mrs. Jules reminded him. Didn't you save the paperclip? Oh, I guess not, Joe admitted. Bibi was finishing up the last part of her picture. Paperclip, please, she said, without looking up from her work. Oh, yeah, one for me too, said Calvin. Mrs. Jules slammed her hand down on the desk. Do you think paperclips grow on trees? She asked. I don't know, said Calvin. I gave each one of you a paperclip at the beginning of the year. It was your responsibility to take care of it. She opened her desk drawer and took out a paperclip box and opened it. There are only 6 left, she said, shaking her head in dismay. Ooh, can I have one? Asked Joy. I can't find mine. Mrs. Jules was too angry to reply. She moved to the front of the room. "You children are so spoiled," she said. "Do you have any idea what it takes to make just one paperclip?" She held up one of her last remaining paperclips. "Look at the perfect double loop and the way it gleams in the light, almost like a mirror." Her anger seemed to melt away as she marveled at the magnificent metal masterpiece. "It takes a lot of very talented people and years of training and hard work," she exclaimed. "First, there is the wire maker. Paperclip wire has to be just right, not too stiff and not too wiggly either. Then there's the wire polisher," she continued. "That's who gives the paperclip its special gleam. And the wire cutter, who cuts each wire to the precise length. And finally, and most important, the master bender. The bender carefully bends the wire into a perfect double loop." And she put her hand over her heart. "Sadly, in these rush, hurry days, not too many people study the art of paperclip bending. There were only a handful of master benders left in the whole world. And who knows, in 10 or 20 years, there might not be any. Everyone will have to switch to staples." "That is so sad," said Dana. Mrs. Jules gave the paperclip to Dana. "Now, don't lose it." "I won't," Dana promised. "Let me see," said Bibi. Dana proudly showed Bibi her new paperclip. "It's so beautiful," said Bibi, admiring the double loops. "I never noticed it before." "I'm going to be a paperclip bender when I grow up," said Calvin. Mrs. Jules smiled at Calvin. She had never been more proud of a student. Chapter 5. Eric, and what's his name? Oh, that's right, Eric. There are 3 Erics in Mrs. Jules' class. Eric Fry, Eric Bacon, and the other one who everyone always forgets, Eric Ovens. Eric Fry is strong and fast. He is usually the first one chosen when picking teams. Eric Bacon is funny, clever, and just a little bit sneaky. Everyone in Mrs. Jules' class likes him, but no one completely trusts him. Eric Ovens is kind, quiet, and 100% trustworthy. Sadly, that kind of person is often overlooked. But not today. He thought as he sat at his desk, patiently waiting for Mrs. Jules to finish taking attendance, today would be his day of glory. In his pocket was a plastic bag with 83 nail clippings. 2 numbers had been written on the whiteboard, 71 and 2,677. So far, the class had collected a total of 2,677 nail clippings. 71 were the most brought in by any one kid. They didn't just have to be toenails. Fingernails counted too. Eric Ovens took his bag out of his pocket and placed it on his desk. "How many you got?" whispered Kathy, who sat next to him. Eric didn't want to jinx his big day by saying the number aloud. Besides, he knew Kathy would only say something mean or mock him. Mrs. Jules closed her attendance book. "Anyone have any nail clippings this morning?" Eric Ovens raised his hand. "Oh, yes, Eric," said Mrs. Jules. Eric Ovens quietly pushed his chair back, but before he got up, he saw Eric Fry already making his way to the front of the room. 40, Eric Fry declared proudly. Eric Fry had kept his hand in a fist all morning. Everyone thought he was just trying to be tough. But now he opened his fist and let 40 nail clippings fall into the collection bucket. "Well done, Eric," said Mrs. Jules. Everyone clapped their hands. Eric Ovens smiled as he clapped his hands too. 83 was more than double 40. Eric Fry did the math on the board. "Halfway to 1,000,000, cheered Stephen. Not quite, Allison told him. Anyone else? Asked Mrs. Jules. Again, Eric Ovens raised his hand, but Eric Bacon had already hopped out of his seat and was headed toward the front of the room. He handed Mrs. Jules a plastic bag full of nail clippings. 349, he declared triumphantly. The class went wild. Sherry gasped, and Stephen fell out of his chair. Eric Bacon danced around Mrs. Jules' desk like a football player who had scored a touchdown. Mrs. Jules was skeptical of the spectacle. I could count them, she warned. Eric stopped dancing. Go ahead, he challenged her. Mrs. Jules stared Eric Bacon in the eye, and Eric Bacon stared right back. Mrs. Jules dumped the bag on her desk and divided the clippings into 4 piles. She asked Damien, Allison, and John to help. They each took a pile, and then Mrs. Jules added the totals together. 349, she announced, just as Eric said. Again, everyone cheered, and Eric Bacon continued his victory dance. How did you get so many? Mrs. Jules asked him. Eric B. stopped dancing. I went door to door asking my neighbors, he said. Everyone laughed. Leslie had sold wrapping paper door to door, but she couldn't imagine asking people for their toenails. It's easier than asking for money, said Eric. Everyone was happy to donate. He erased number 71 and put 349 in its place. Then he did the math. Almost 1 million, Stephen called out. Not even close, muttered Allison. Mrs. Jules told Eric Bacon to take a Tootsie Roll Pop from her coffee can. He took one. Then, when she wasn't looking, he took another. Anyone else? Asked Mrs. Jules. Eric Oven sat glumly at his desk. Raise your hand, urged Kathy. Why bother? He muttered. Kathy got up from her seat and stood next to him. She grabbed Eric's arm and raised it for him. Eric Ovens brought a whole lot, she announced. Bring them on up, said Mrs. Jules. He had no choice. It's just 83, he said, and then emptied his bag into the nail bucket. That's the second most ever, shouted Kathy, and she started clapping. Amazingly, everyone else clapped too. They were still clapping as he did the math on the board. It's 3,149 now. That's closer to 1 million, exclaimed Stephen. Everyone cheered. Even Allison couldn't argue with that.